The Chiefs are not just well-rested as they prepare for the divisional round of the playoffs. They're in one of the best positions they could be in, especially after the results of the AFC Wild Card round. This situation could be key as they aim for a potential three-peat. I'll dive into why this is so great for the Chiefs in today's video, plus I'll cover some important coach interviews, recent roster moves, and more. But first, how about those games? There's a lot to talk about with the wild card round now wrapped up, excluding the Vikings versus Rams game, which is tonight. But there's also a lot happening with the Chiefs lately. To start, last week, offensive coordinator Matt Nagy interviewed for the New York Jets head coach position. While I'm not sure if he'll get the job, considering the Jets have spoken with so many candidates, anything is possible. The Jets also spoke with assistant GM Mike Borgonzi about their GM opening. Borgonzi has also been interviewing with the Titans for their GM role. For those who might not know, Borgonzi has been a key figure for the Chiefs, working his way up through the ranks to become the right-hand man to GM Brett Veach. He oversees the Chiefs' college and pro scouting operations, plays a major role in the draft, and helps with roster management, including free agency, waiver claims, and trades. So, there's a chance Matt Nagy or Mike Borgonzi could be elsewhere next season. I also discussed some potential replacements for Matt Nagy as offensive coordinator in a previous video, so feel free to check that out if you're curious. But the Chiefs may also have to think about replacing their assistant GM, Mike Borgonzi, if he moves to the Jets or the Titans. Honestly, both teams would be lucky to land him, considering he's been such a vital part of running one of the most successful organizations in the NFL. But the coaching interviews didn't stop with Nagy. Defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo also had 3 virtual interviews on Friday. The Jets were one of the teams, as they're talking to just about every available coach from the Chiefs. The Raiders, who fired their head coach and GM last week, also interviewed Spags, along with the Jaguars. In a recent press conference, Spagnuolo said he's interested in being a head coach again, and these interviews confirm that he's at least exploring the opportunity. I'm not sure if he'll land any of these roles, but he certainly deserves another shot as a head coach. I'd hate to see him leave, selfishly, of course, but I'll always wish him the best unless he's going up against the Chiefs. If he does somehow become the Raiders' head coach, though, I might be sick to my stomach thinking about it for years. No matter what happens, Steve Spagnuolo, a 4-time Super Bowl champion, is going to be an incredible asset to whichever team hires him. And whoever steps into the role of defensive coordinator for the Chiefs will have some huge shoes to fill. I'll admit, I selfishly hope Steve Spagnuolo stays in Kansas City because the consistency of the coaching staff has been one of the underrated keys to the Chiefs' success. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into building a dynasty since Patrick Mahomes became QB1, but we all know how important Coach Spags has been to this team. And don't worry about the Chiefs being distracted by all these interviews as they prepare for the divisional round. These interviews only happened because the team is on a bye week, and now that the playoffs are in full swing, no more interviews can happen until the Chiefs' season ends, hopefully after they win their 3rd Super Bowl in a row. Now, onto the Associated Press All-Pro team. On Friday, the AP released its All-Pro honors, which were voted on by a national panel of 50 media members. 4 Chiefs players made the list, with 3 of them earning first-team honors, left guard or left tackle as needed, Joe Thuney, center Creed Humphrey, and defensive tackle Chris Jones. Cornerback Trent McDuffie made second-team All-Pro, just behind Patrick Surtain II and Derek Stingley Jr. While some fans are upset about who made the list and who didn't, there's not much that can be done now. I would have loved to see Trey Smith on there as well. I really think Trey Smith deserves a spot on that All-Pro team, and the Chiefs should do everything they can to keep him around for years to come, especially since he'll be a free agent after this season. But that's a discussion for another time. You could also make a case for McDuffie being on the first team, but I'm still really happy for the guys who made it. Now, on to some heartwarming news. Last week, a fan named William Mashburn went above and beyond to help Chiefs cornerback Jalen Watson. When Watson posted on X asking for help with shoveling his driveway, Mashburn refused to let him do it himself. He immediately DM'd Watson his address and showed up to shovel the driveway for him. In return, Watson surprised him with a signed, authentic jersey. But Mashburn didn't do it for the jersey. He just wanted to help out a fellow Kansas Cityan and a Chiefs player who's done great things for the team. And the kindness didn't stop there. Over the weekend, Chiefs offensive linemen Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith were spotted helping a woman get her car unstuck after the snow and ice had piled up. This is the type of content that warms your heart, especially with everything going on. And speaking of good news, the Mahomes family announced the birth of their third child today. They've named her Golden Ray Mahomes. Patrick had mentioned after the Christmas win that his goal was to secure a first-round bye so they could have their baby before the divisional round, and that's exactly what happened. Now that both mother and baby are healthy, Pat can focus fully on the playoffs and the big game ahead this weekend. Let's hope they keep that momentum going. Let's talk about the Chiefs' divisional round matchup, some roster moves, and what's been happening lately. First off, we now know the Chiefs will face the Texans at Arrowhead for the divisional round. It's shaping up to be an exciting game, and fans are ready to see how this one plays out. Now, on to some recent signings. On Friday, the Chiefs made two important moves by signing players to reserve/future contracts. These deals don't count against the team's salary cap until the new league year begins, which is common for free agents or players who are on practice squads of teams whose seasons are now over. Once they sign a futures contract, those players can no longer negotiate with other teams, and teams can sign as many players to futures deals as they want, as long as they don't exceed the 90-man roster limit, which goes into effect at the start of the new league year. Before I tell you who the Chiefs signed, it's worth noting that wide receiver Justin Watson was signed to a futures deal back in February 2022. So, don't completely write off these players just yet. Sometimes players on these deals can fight their way onto the 53-man roster. You never know who might surprise us. Before cutdown day, it's always interesting to see which players might end up making a difference on the field. So, let's dive into the two players the Chiefs recently signed to future contracts. First up is defensive back Jason Taylor II, a 25-year-old safety from Oklahoma State. Taylor was drafted by the Rams in the 7th round of the 2023 NFL Draft, but was placed on injured reserve at the start of the season. After a stint on the Rams practice squad, he was released and later signed by the Cardinals to their practice squad. Taylor has had limited NFL experience, appearing in just 8 games with the Rams and recording 5 tackles. However, he's known for his impressive athleticism, with a strong vertical jump, broad jump, and an elite speed grade according to his relative athletic score. He definitely has the potential to contribute in the future. The second player the Chiefs signed was linebacker Shaun Bradley. A 6th-round pick by the Eagles in the 2020 NFL Draft, Bradley is 27 years old, so a couple of years older than Taylor. He played 3 seasons with the Eagles, collecting 45 total tackles. But what stands out is his role on special teams. He played over 300 snaps each season in that area. Bradley could carve out a spot with the Chiefs by earning the trust of special teams coordinator Dave Taub, as that's been a key part of his game in the past. But that's not all the Chiefs did. They also announced that defensive tackle Marlon Tuipulotu has been placed on injured reserve. Tuipulotu was on the 53-man roster and saw a good amount of playing time during the Week 18 finale against the Broncos. It looks like he must have picked up an injury during that game. Hopefully, Marlon Tuipulotu heals up quickly, but with him being placed on injured reserve, that opens up a spot on the roster. This most likely means we'll be seeing either cornerback Jalen Watson or wide receiver Mecole Hardman returning soon, since both players had their 21-day windows to return activated. No disrespect to Mecole, but I think returner Nico is doing a solid job. If I had to choose between Watson and Hardman, I'd go with Jalen Watson. He'd be a huge boost to the secondary, especially since defensive stats started to drop after he broke his ankle in Week 7 and had to undergo surgery. However, I do think Mecole could be ready to return before Watson. He had a minor knee procedure, so if the Chiefs bring him back, We'll have to see what they decide to do with the returner position. Do they keep Nico around, or risk waiving him, hoping he clears waivers, and then bringing him back to the practice squad? I think McColl would be more valuable as an offensive depth piece, so if the Chiefs decide to keep him, it'll likely be for that reason, using him in emergency situations or for specific offensive plays. Either way, we'll likely find out soon who the Chiefs will bring back, whether it's McColl Hardman, Jalen Watson, or maybe even both. On the topic of injuries, Andy Reid shared during his press conference on Friday that some key players were back at practice. Safety Shamari Connor, who had been dealing with a concussion and a shoulder injury after Week 18 against Denver, was back on the field. Also returning were defensive tackle Chris Jones, with a calf strain, running back Isaiah Pacheco, with rib issues, right tackle Jawan Taylor, knee, and cornerback Jalen Watson. Reid mentioned that Watson looked good during his one-on-one reps, moving around well, so it's promising that these players are getting healthy just in time for the playoffs. Andy Reid mentioned that left tackle DJ Humphries is headed in the right direction after playing in Week 18 against the Broncos. I actually had a great conversation with Seth Kaiser on my channel last week about whether DJ Humphries should be the left tackle for the divisional round, or if the Chiefs should stick with Joe Thuney at left tackle. If you haven't seen that conversation yet, it's worth checking out. Reid did say there were a couple of plays in that game against the Broncos that Humphries would like to have back, especially in the second half, where he struggled a bit. However, we'll have to wait and see what the Chiefs decide to do. Andy Reid wasn't exactly committed to starting Humphries at left tackle for the divisional round, which will be against the Houston Texans. For reference, Joe Thuney played left tackle when the Chiefs faced the Texans on December 21st, during that stretch of 3 games in 11 days. The Chiefs pulled off wins in all 3, but this divisional round game is one I expect them to win again. Now, let's talk about the Texans' performance in the wild card round. They ended up dominating the Chargers in a game that, honestly, I thought the Chargers were going to win. But Justin Herbert had a rough day, throwing 4 interceptions. Pretty wild, considering he'd only thrown 3 all season up until that point. To make matters worse, Herbert was also sacked 4 times, and the Chargers could only manage 2.8 yards per carry on the ground. Despite a monster performance from Keenan Allen, who caught 9 passes for 197 yards, it wasn't nearly enough. One of Herbert's interceptions was returned for a pick 6, and another was nearly returned again for a touchdown on the very next drive, setting up a field goal for the Texans. That's 10 points off turnovers alone. The Chargers were also just 3 for 11 on third downs and turned the ball over on downs once. They were 0 for 1 in the red zone. The Texans weren't perfect either, though. They were only 5 for 14 on third downs themselves. The Texans weren't perfect, but they did perform better in the red zone, converting 2 for 4, while the Chargers struggled in that area, going 0 for 1. The pick 6 by Eric Murray really put the game out of reach, turning a close 6-13 game into a 6-20 scoreline. The Chargers just couldn't recover after that. C.J. Stroud threw for nearly 300 yards and a touchdown, but he also had a couple of near interceptions, plus was sacked 3 times. Still, big performances from Joe Mixon and Nico Collins, each going over 100 yards, were more than enough to secure the win for the Texans. So now, the Texans are headed to Arrowhead to face the Chiefs in some pretty brutal temperatures, around 10 to 15 degrees with wind chills possibly close to 0. The game is scheduled for Saturday at 3:30 p.m., and at the time of this recording, the Chiefs are favored by about 8 points, with an over-under set at 42 points. Honestly, I'd be pretty surprised if the Chiefs lost this game. This matchup against the Texans feels like the ideal situation for Kansas City, especially compared to the Broncos and Chargers. Think about it. Would you really want to face the Chargers again for a 3rd time, especially with their defense and Justin Herbert's recent struggles? As for the Broncos, the Chiefs already beat them earlier in the season with a blocked field goal. The Chargers were both 1-score games, and honestly, I just didn't want those matchups again. But I like the Texans. They're solid, and the Chiefs already beat them by 8 points back on December 21st. In fact, they could have scored more than the 27 points they finished with, since they kneeled the ball out inside the Texans' 20-yard line. Patrick Mahomes threw for 260 yards and a touchdown in that game, while Kareem Hunt averaged 5 yards per carry. That also marked the regular season debut of Hollywood Brown, so the Chiefs have seen the Texans before and already know they can handle them. Looking ahead, the advantage of the Steelers losing is that now the Ravens and Bills will duke it out, and the Chiefs only need to face one of them if they can get past the Texans. In that previous matchup, Hollywood Brown caught 5 passes for 45 yards, while Xavier Worthy led the group with 7 catches for 65 yards. C.J. Stroud was picked off twice, once by Jaden Hicks and once by Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs were in control throughout the game, winning the time of possession battle, converting 50% on 3rd and 4th downs, and going 3 for 5 in the red zone. I think the Chiefs will pull off the win again, but I'll dive into the details of the game when I preview the Texans vs. Chiefs matchup in a later video. Before we wrap up, let's talk about some other AFC West action. The Broncos were crushed 31-7 by the Buffalo Bills, unable to score after their opening drive. Meanwhile, the Ravens took care of the Steelers, winning by 2 touchdowns in a game that wasn't even close. That means the Ravens will now head to Buffalo for a showdown with the Bills on Sunday evening, and I can't wait to see how that game plays out. The winner will face the winner of the Chiefs-Texans game in the AFC Championship, and if the Chiefs manage to beat the Texans, that game will be hosted at Arrowhead. As for the Ravens vs. Bills game, I'm honestly not sure how it will turn out. The Ravens beat the Bills earlier this season in a dominant 35-10 victory, but both teams are strong contenders, and both quarterbacks are in the MVP conversation. Derrick Henry is also a big factor in the Ravens' success. It's a tough one to call, so we'll have to see how it unfolds. In the NFC, the Washington Commanders will travel to Detroit to face the Lions immediately after the Texans and Chiefs game on Saturday. Then, on Sunday, before the Ravens and Bills square off, the winner of tonight's Vikings and Rams Wild Card battle will travel to Philly to take on the Eagles. The Commanders, who won an exciting game against the Buccaneers, and the Eagles, who handled the Packers convincingly despite losing multiple starters to injury, will both be looking to keep their playoff runs alive. I'm absolutely pumped for the football action this weekend. Let me know what you thought about Wild Card Weekend and your thoughts on the Texans heading to KC in cold weather to face the Chiefs. The Chiefs will be well rested and ready to go, but I'm curious to hear your take. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, let's go. How about those Chiefs?